Firstly, if you were Keir Starmer, what would be the big question you'd ask of the Prime Minister today?
I think we can expect Keir Starmer to raise the PPE contracts that's now, in hindsight, starting to look a bit dodgy, some of them. You know, we've had this sort of slew of allegations for months about the VIP lane for people who could recommend companies to Tory ministers. And we've got to, you know, if we go back to March and April 2020, there was a huge shortage of the personal protective equipment so vital for NHS staff and care home staff, and the government was doing everything it could to source it. Now, when we look at some of those deals, those contracts, and particularly ones relating to Michelle Mone, the Tory peer, some of them are looking a bit dodgy in hindsight.
Of course, we've heard some of these questions be asked at Prime Minister's Questions before under other Prime Ministers. Boris Johnson always had a favourite comeback to this one, which was a letter sent by Rachel Reeves before she was Shadow Chancellor. I think she was Shadow Cabinet Office Minister, and she sent off a list of companies for the government to use in their scramble for PPE. Now, these were companies that had got in contact with her in the same way that there were companies that got in contact with Tory ministers. It does seem that there's a sort of a bit of a shoe on each foot here in terms of the scramble for PPE in that confused time during COVID.
It was quite a febrile atmosphere, just as, you know, the pandemic hit our shores. I think what Labour would point to is the fact that a lot of these deals did link to Tory donors, or, you know, the infamous case of Matt Hancock's pub landlord, his local boozer in his constituency in West Suffolk. So the links to the Conservative Party, I think Labour are very keen to highlight that. And, of course, last night in the Commons, we had Labour use this motion to force out of the government documents relating to this company that might be linked to Michelle Mone, this PPE MedPro. So I suspect we can expect to see those documents, although not in the near future.
Yes, it will be very, very interesting to see. Although I think I'm right in remembering that there was an accountancy firm in Birmingham that Rachel Reeves suggested should supply high-quality masks and the rest of it. I think we might, if that question is asked, we might hear some of those funny examples from Rishi Sunak, if, of course, he's been briefed in the same way that Boris Johnson had been. Sometimes he's less quick off his feet, though. Moving on to other issues, though, we've seen two big U-turns this week from the Prime Minister, one on housing targets and general sort of planning, and the other on wind farms. It's almost like these two are pushing in different directions.
It's all relating to planning, and the Tory party is always divided on planning because it's a Conservative party. The idea is to conserve. They don't like change. But then the house building target of 300,000 homes a year, well, where are they going to go? The Conservative party riven with division over this because they do need more voters, and they have a... If you own your home, you're more likely to vote Conservative. Statistics show that. But equally, a lot of people don't want them built in their backyards, and it's certainly across the southern shires of the Conservative Party heartlands. And then, of course, the wind, onshore wind. So during the leadership election that Rishi Sunak didn't win and then became leader anyway, he spoke about maintaining this de facto ban on onshore wind. But now the Conservative Party backbenchers have forced him into a U-turn on that. So wind farms will be built onshore where there's local consent.
And it's interesting because normally you'd expect the sort of stereotypical Tory backbencher to be sort of anti-onshore wind, and yet it's the backbenchers, it's the people like Simon Clarke, Liz Truss and indeed Boris Johnson who forced the Prime Minister to U-turn on this. Are Rishi Sunak's backbenchers more eco-friendly than he is?
It certainly seems that they are pushing him to those sorts of positions. I mean, the invasion of Ukraine on February the 24th really changed everything because we've all seen what's happened to our energy bills since. So people who were opposed to onshore wind now look at it and think, well, it's the cheapest form of electricity and it's our wind. You know, if we put these turbines on the shores of the United Kingdom, then we're not reliant on foreign powers who can push up the price of energy or cut it off altogether if they so desire.
Well, I suppose that only matters when the wind blows, but I suppose if you're a Tory MP, it's quite an attractive thing for all this private investment to come and build these wind turbines. It's not taxpayers' money going into it. Just finally, the new SNP group leader. Are we going to expect a sort of a more upbeat Prime Minister's Questions? Of course, Ian Blackford was was famously slow and, dare I say it, boring when it came to his questions.
He was a little bit dull, and you remember, you know, we sit in the press gallery each week for Prime Minister's Questions at noon, and every time Blackford got to his feet, there was this audible groan across the Conservative benches, almost like a pantomime in the end. And, you know, he'd puff himself up with his waistcoat, and he became a bit of a bit of a figure of fun, to be perfectly honest. So Stephen Flynn coming in after winning this Westminster leadership election last night, I think he will have a new approach, and he's 34 years old. He's only been in Parliament for 3 years, elected at the December 2019 general election, so he'll bring a fresh approach. The SNP itself, it's 44 MPs. They're quite divided, remember, because a lot of them are very loyal to Nicola Sturgeon, but a lot of them also think maybe the focus on independence at the moment, when there's a cost of living crisis, maybe it's not what voters want. And seeing how they rally behind their new leader will be interesting at noon, I think.
Also interesting, Aberdeen MP. It was a Tory seat until 2019 from that 17 to 19 period. More marginal for the SNP. Also, crucially, oil and gas. Might we see potentially more support for the oil and gas industry coming from the SNP front bench?
We hear rumours of the fact that Stephen Flynn and Nicola Sturgeon have previously had fallings out about green issues, because, as you say, as a constituency MP for Aberdeen South, that is a town, a city, very reliant on offshore fossil fuels. So, yeah, that's where Aberdeen's money comes from. So I think he is more likely to be a supporter of those forms of energy than perhaps Nicola Sturgeon might like.